I'm Riley, and I'm 32. It was Christmas dinner. Everyone gathered around the table like we were the perfect family. I just reached for Aunt Jill's hand and thanked her out loud in front of everyone for the little keychain she'd sent me for my birthday a couple of months earlier. It was nothing fancy, just a delicate silver chain with a tiny star charm. But I told her I carried it everywhere because it meant the world to me. Aunt Jo stopped mid-sentence. She set her fork down very slowly, looked straight across the table, and said, calm as anything, "Riley, honey, I didn't send you a keychain. I bought you a $420,000 apartment downtown. The star charm was just something small to hold you over." The room went dead silent. Forks froze halfway to mouths. My dad's face drained of color. Suzanne, my stepmother, gripped her wine glass so hard I thought it might crack. And Brooke, my 19-year-old half-sister, suddenly looked like she'd seen a ghost. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like the odd one out in your own family, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and drop where you're watching from in the comments. You're going to want to stay for what happened next. Let me take you back to how we ended up here. Let me take you back to that Christmas dinner so you can really feel what it was like. Picture the table, perfectly set like something out of a magazine. Suzanne's best china, candles flickering everywhere, the whole dining room smelling like roasted ham and cinnamon. Everyone's laughing, passing dishes around, playing the happy family we pretended to be every year. My dad, David, was carving the turkey with that careful precision he always has. Brooke was glued to her phone, even though phones were supposedly off limits at the table. And Suzanne? She was directing everything like a general, making sure every plate looked just right. Then there was me, sitting in the exact same spot I'd had for the last 16 years, ever since Dad married Suzanne, right at the end, next to the person I was actually excited to see, Aunt Jo. She'd flown in from Arizona as a surprise, and the second I saw her walk through the door, my heart felt a little lighter. Out of everyone in that room, she was the only one who ever made me feel like I truly belonged. So when there was a small lull in the conversation, I reached across the table, squeezed her hand, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Aunt Jo, I never got the chance to thank you properly for the keychain you sent for my birthday. It's so beautiful. I've got it on my keys every single day." I even pulled it out of my purse to show her. Just a simple silver chain with a little star charm. Nothing expensive, but coming from her, it meant everything. The room went dead quiet. Not the cozy, full-belly quiet after a good meal. This was the kind of silence that makes your stomach drop. Aunt Jo's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Dad froze mid-carve. Suzanne's smile locked in place like it was glued on. And Brooke now sat up straight, eyes wide. Aunt Jo set her fork down very, very slowly. "Riley, honey, I didn't send you a keychain. I bought you a $420,000 apartment downtown. The star charm was just something small to hold you over." That's when I knew something was terribly wrong. That's when I knew something was terribly wrong. But to really understand why that moment felt like the floor was dropping out from under me, why Aunt Jo's quiet question hung in the air like a storm about to break, you have to know what my family was really like behind all the perfect holiday smiles. It wasn't always this way. When I was little, before everything changed, it was just me and my parents. My mom was everything to me. Warm, funny, the kind of person who made even ordinary days feel special. Then, when I was 8, she got sick. Cancer. It moved fast. Within a year, she was gone, and I was left trying to figure out how to live in a world that felt too big and too quiet. Dad remarried Suzanne 2 years later. She came with Brooke, her daughter, from her first marriage, who was just a toddler at the time. I remember trying so hard to be okay with it all. I wanted Dad to be happy. I wanted a family again. But pretty early on, I started noticing the differences in how we were treated. It was subtle at first. Little things. When we went school shopping, Brooke got the cute outfits from the front of the store, and I got the practical stuff from the clearance rack. Suzanne would smile sweetly and say things like, "We're teaching Riley responsibility and the value of money," like I was some kind of project, not a kid who just lost her mom. By the time we were teenagers, the pattern was impossible to ignore. When Brooke turned 16, she got a brand new SUV with a big red bow in the driveway. When I turned 16, Suzanne said I could use her old sedan when it wasn't needed for family things, which meant basically never. I ended up taking the bus to my part-time job at a coffee shop so I could save for a used car of my own. College was where it really hit home. I worked 2 jobs all through high school, filled out scholarship applications until my eyes burned, and chose the state university because in-state tuition was the only way I could make it work without drowning in debt. I graduated with my nursing degree, completely debt-free, and proud of every single shift I'd worked to get there. Brooke, on the other hand, she applied to expensive private schools, got accepted to her top choice, and never had to worry about how it would get paid for. When people noticed the difference, relatives, family, friends, Suzanne had the perfect answer ready. Riley's always been so independent. She doesn't need as much help. Brooke is still finding her way. Translation: Riley can handle it on her own. Brooke deserves more. The only person who ever saw through it, who ever called it what it was Aunt Jo, my dad's older sister. She never had kids of her own, but from the moment Suzanne came into the picture, Aunt Jo treated me like I was the most important person in the world. She showed up for my school plays, sent cards on my birthdays that actually meant something, asked about my dreams like they mattered. She was the one safe place in a family that always made me feel like I was taking up too much space. She was the one safe place in a family that always made me feel like I was taking up too much space. By the time I was 25, I'd built a life that looked nothing like theirs. I was a pediatric nurse, working long shifts at the children's hospital, and a single mom to my little boy, Ethan. He was 4 now, the absolute light of my world. His dad walked out the second he heard the word pregnant, and honestly, by that point, I wasn't even surprised. I was used to figuring things out on my own. We lived in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment not far from the hospital. It wasn't much. Hand-me-down furniture, thrift store toys. Ethan's bedroom was really just a corner of the living room, separated by a colorful curtain I'd sewn myself. But it was clean. It was ours. And Ethan was happy. He didn't care that his high chair came from a garage sale. He just cared that I was there to read him stories and kiss his forehead every night. My family's relationship with Ethan was complicated. They loved posting pictures of him on social media, Suzanne especially, always calling herself the world's best grandma in the captions. But when it came to real help, babysitting so I could pick up an extra shift, driving him to appointments when I was stuck at work, they were always too busy. David would swing by once a month with a toy and a quick hug, long enough to feel like he'd done his part. Brooke would sometimes drop in for an hour, play with Ethan, take a few cute selfies, then complain about how exhausting kids were. The only person who showed up, really showed up, was Aunt Jo. Every few weeks, she'd drive the 3 hours from her place to spend the weekend with us. She'd walk in with homemade cookies, new books for Ethan, and this quiet, steady kindness that made everything feel a little less heavy. She'd babysit without me even asking, help fix whatever was broken in the apartment, and actually listen when I talked about my day. When Ethan was 3, he got really sick. Pneumonia that landed him in the hospital for a full week. Aunt Jo took leave from work and stayed by our side the entire time. She slept in those awful plastic chairs, brought me clean clothes, held Ethan when I had to step out for a minute to breathe. David came by twice, less than an hour each time. That's when it really sunk in. Blood doesn't always mean family. The people who show up when it's hard, those are your real family. A couple of years later, Aunt Jo calls me with news of her own. Breast cancer. The words hit me like a punch. The first thing I asked was, "What do you need? Who's taking you to appointments?" The answer was, "No one." David was swamped at work. Suzanne had commitments with Brooke's college stuff. Brooke was too young for something this serious. So it was me. For 6 months, twice a week, I'd finish my shift, strap Ethan into his car seat, and drive the 3 hours to Aunt Joe's house, then another hour to the cancer center. Treatment days were long, hours of waiting, Ethan coloring quietly on the floor with books Aunt Joe bought just for him. On the worst chemo days, I'd stay overnight, making sure she ate, took her meds, didn't fall trying to get to the bathroom. Ethan would crawl up next to her on the couch, pat her bald head so gently, and whisper, "Aunt Joe's brave, Mommy." And I'd swallow the lump in my throat and agree. Ethan would crawl up next to her on the couch, pat her bald head so gently, and whisper, "Aunt Joe's brave, Mommy." And I'd swallow the lump in my throat and agree. The night she finished her last round of chemo is one I'll never forget. We were sitting in her living room, Ethan asleep between us, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the TV on low. Aunt Joe grabbed my hand, her grip stronger than it had been in months, and looked at me with tears in her eyes. "You saved me, Riley," she said quietly. "Not just with your nursing knowledge, though that helped more than you know. You showed up. Every single time. When everyone else had excuses, you were here." I squeezed her hand back. "You're family, Aunt Joe. Real family. This is what we do." She shook her head, a flash of anger crossing her face, something I wasn't used to seeing from her. "Your father called twice in 6 months. Twice! Suzanne sent a card. Brooke texted a few times." She took a shaky breath. "But you? Working full-time, raising Ethan alone? You made it happen every time I needed you." Then she said something that caught me off guard. "After my husband passed a few years ago, I always planned to leave everything to your dad. Figured he'd take care of Brooke and help you if you ever needed it. But after these past months, I've changed my will." I shifted uncomfortably. "Aunt Joe, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." Her voice was firm, but gentle. "I've watched this family for years, made excuses, hoped it would get better. It hasn't. If anything, it's gotten worse." She was right. Even during her treatment, the patterns never changed. David would call me for updates instead of calling her directly. Suzanne would ask me to pass along messages. They used me like a messenger, never acknowledging that I was the one actually holding everything together. When Aunt Joe's strength started coming back, hair growing in, color returning to her cheeks, she made an announcement one afternoon. "I'm going to travel. All the places my husband and I dreamed about but never got to, starting with Europe this spring. 3 whole months." I was thrilled for her. After everything, she deserved that joy. But I was also going to miss her like crazy. She'd been my anchor for so long. Before she left, she pulled me aside. "I want to do something special for your birthday this year. 30's a big one. I have something planned, something that's really going to help you and Ethan." My birthday was in October. Aunt Joe left for Europe right after. Her postcards started arriving weekly. Paris, Greece, Italy, full of stories and photos. She sounded happier than I'd ever heard her. A few days before my birthday, a package showed up at my door. European postmark from Aunt Joe. Inside was a little box with a silver keychain, the one with the star charm, and a note. "Happy birthday, sweetheart. Just a little something to hold you over until I'm back with your real gift. Love you always, Aunt Joe." It made me smile. I attached it to my keys right away. I had no idea it was just a placeholder. It made me smile. I attached it to my keys right away. I had no idea it was just a placeholder. My birthday came and went quietly that October. I pulled a double shift at the hospital, holiday pay helped stock up for Christmas, and when I got home, bone tired, there was a voicemail from Dad wishing me happy birthday after Suzanne apparently reminded him. Brooke sent a text with a couple of cake emojis. No card, no gift, no dinner invitation, just the bare minimum acknowledgement that yes, this was the day I'd been born 30 years ago. It stung a little, but it wasn't surprising. Ethan, though, he'd made me a card at daycare with his handprints and glittery letters that spelled, "I love mommy." That one was worth more than anything they could have bought. I called Aunt Jo that night on the international number she'd given me, told her how much I loved the keychain, how I carried it everywhere. She laughed, warm and far away across the ocean, and said, "Oh, honey, that little thing is nothing. Wait till you see what I really have for you. It's going to change everything." I figured maybe a beautiful piece of jewelry from one of the places she'd visited, or something thoughtful like that. Aunt Jo's gifts were always meaningful, never flashy. I didn't think much more about it. November flew by with more postcards, her smiling in front of cathedrals, on beaches, eating pasta in little Italian villages. She sounded so alive. In one card, she mentioned she'd asked Dad to handle something important for my birthday gift while she was away. That struck me as odd. Dad wasn't usually involved in her presents, but I assumed it was something simple, like coordinating delivery of whatever she'd picked up abroad. Then December arrived, and with it, the usual rush. My shifts got longer as other nurses took vacation time. I was saving every extra dollar for Ethan's Christmas. We started our little traditions: advent calendar, hot chocolate while looking at neighborhood lights. Around that time, I noticed Brooke posting photos on social media of what looked like a brand new apartment. Gorgeous downtown views, modern furniture, huge windows. When I casually mentioned it to Dad on one of our rare phone calls, he said, "Oh yeah, Brooke's house sitting for someone who's traveling overseas. Great opportunity for her." I thought, lucky her, and didn't dwell on it. Brooke always seemed to land in comfortable spots: internships through Suzanne's friends, summer jobs through Dad's connections. Good things just found her. Meanwhile, Ethan and I were planning our own quiet Christmas. Paper snowflakes on the windows, a small tree we'd picked together. I'd saved enough for the train set he'd been talking about nonstop. Mid-December, the invitation to Christmas dinner came. Same as every year, a quick call from Suzanne. Dinner at 3. Oh, and Aunt Jo's flying in as a surprise. She wants to spend the holiday with family. My heart lifted at that. I hadn't seen her since before her trip. Having her there made the whole thing feel worth it. Maybe this year, with her home and healthy, things would feel different. I even splurged on a new dress I couldn't really afford and small gifts for everyone. Ethan was buzzing with excitement about seeing Aunt Jo again and whatever stories or treasures she'd bring back from faraway places. I had no clue that her surprise wasn't just coming home. It was about to blow the lid off every lie my family had been living for the past 2 months. Christmas morning came cold and bright. Ethan woke me up at dawn, bouncing on the bed with that pure kid excitement only Santa can bring. We opened our little pile of presents under the small tree. His eyes lighting up over the train set made every extra shift worth it. By afternoon, we were headed to Dad and Suzanne's. I'd let myself feel a flicker of hope on the drive over. Aunt Jo was back, healthy, full of life again. Maybe her new perspective would rub off on everyone. Maybe this year I wouldn't feel like a guest at my own family's table. The house looked exactly the same. White lights, perfect decorations, classical Christmas music playing softly. Brooke was already there in a new outfit that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Dad hugged me like nothing was wrong. Suzanne air-kissed both cheeks and murmured that I looked nice. Ethan ran straight to the coloring books I'd packed for him. Brooke launched into a long story about her house-sitting gig, how amazing the downtown apartment was, the gourmet kitchen, the view, the furniture the owner had left behind. I nodded along, making the right sounds. It sounded like a dream, but good for her, you know? Opportunities like that always seem to find Brooke. Then the doorbell rang, and there was Aunt Jo, tanned, radiant, hair thicker than before chemo, carrying a suitcase and the biggest smile I'd seen on her in years. Ethan launched himself at her legs. She scooped him up, then pulled me into a long hug that smelled like sunshine and airport coffee. We spent the next hour listening to her stories, hiking in Spain, cooking classes in Tuscany, museums she'd only ever dreamed of. The table felt lighter than it had in years. Even Brooke seemed genuinely interested. Dinner was served, everyone settled in, and conversation flowed easier than usual. That's when I did it. I reached for Aunt Joe's hand again and said, warm and loud enough for the whole table, "Aunt Joe, I have to thank you again for that keychain you sent for my birthday. I really do carry it everywhere. It's my favorite thing." I smiled at her, expecting her to smile back. Instead, the entire room froze. You could hear the grandfather clock ticking, ice settling in glasses, someone's nervous swallow. Aunt Joe set her fork down with this deliberate clink. Her eyes moved slowly, first to me, then to Dad, then Suzanne, then Brooke. "Riley, honey," she said, her voice so calm it was almost scary. "What keychain are you talking about?" I pulled it out again, held it up so the little star caught the light. "This one, the one you sent from Europe with the note, something to hold me over till you got back." Aunt Joe stared at it like it was something dangerous. Then her face changed. The warm glow from her trip hardened into something I'd never seen on her before. Cold, quiet fury. "I didn't send you a keychain, sweetheart." She paused, let the silence stretch. "You bought me a $420,000 apartment downtown. The keychain was just the bonus." "I bought you a $420,000 apartment downtown. The keychain was just the bonus." The words landed like a thunderclap. Brooke's phone slipped from her plate and clattered onto her plate. Suzanne's wine glass tipped, red spilling across the white tablecloth like a wound. Dad, David, went through about 3 shades of pale before settling on gray. And me? I just sat there blinking, waiting for the punchline that never came. Aunt Joe didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She turned to Dad. "David," she said, before I left for Europe, "I called you, David. I told you I'd found the perfect place for Riley and Ethan. 2 bedrooms, safe neighborhood, walking distance to the hospital, good schools. I paid cash, full amount, deed transferred straight into Riley's name, as a thank you for everything she did for me when no one else could be bothered." Dad shrank in his chair. Aunt Joe's eyes moved to Brooke. "So tell me, sweetheart, whose apartment have you been living in for the past 2 months? Brooke's face crumpled. She looked at Suzanne in pure panic. "Mom, you said you promised she'd never find out." Suzanne tried to speak, but nothing came out for a second. The story spilled out in ugly, frantic pieces. They'd decided, without ever asking me, that Brooke needed the apartment more for college, that I was independent enough to keep managing in my tiny rental, that by the time Aunt Joe got back, Brooke would be settled and it would just be accepted. They even forged thank you notes in my name, 3 of them, sent to Aunt Joe in Europe, gushing about how perfect the apartment was, how grateful I was, how Brooke was just helping me out by staying there temporarily. Dad finally found his voice, hoarse and small. "We were going to tell you eventually. We thought we'd have more time." Aunt Joe laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "More time to steal from your own daughter?" She stood up slowly, hands trembling, not from weakness, but from rage. "I want the keys, right now." Suzanne tried one last deflection. "We've already spent thousands decorating it. Furniture, bedding, everything Brooke needs." "Money spent on property that was never yours," Aunt Joe cut in, voice like ice. "Would you like me to call the police and explain? I have the purchase documents, the deed, copies of every forged letter you sent me." The threat worked. Suzanne reached into her purse with shaking fingers, pulled out the keyring, and set it on the table like it burned her. Aunt Joe picked it up, turned to me, and smiled. The first real smile since the bomb dropped. "Riley, would you like to see your apartment?" I looked around the table one last time. At Dad, avoiding my eyes, Suzanne calculating damage control, Brooke sobbing like she was the victim. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely calm. "Yes," I said quietly. "I think I would." We left the table just like that. Ethan had been coloring quietly through the whole thing. Kids pick up on tension but don't always know what to do with it, so I gathered his books and crayons, buckled him into his coat, and followed Aunt Jo out the door. I didn't look back. I could feel their eyes on us, but no one said a word to stop me. The drive downtown was only 20 minutes, but it felt like crossing into a different world. Aunt Jo filled the quiet with soft details. "I looked at dozens of places," she said, glancing over at me with a small smile. "But the moment I walked into this one, I knew it was yours. Corner unit, 3rd floor. Big windows facing the park, hardwood floors, 2 real bedrooms, one for you, one for Ethan. Close enough to the hospital that you could walk on nice days." We pulled up in front of a beautiful old brick building with black shutters and window boxes that still held a few stubborn winter flowers. It was the kind of place I'd passed 100 times and thought, people who live here have everything figured out. Aunt Jo let us inside. The lobby was warm, quiet, with original wood paneling and a tiny elevator that smelled faintly of polish. Ethan pressed the button for floor 3, excited by the brass numbers. Door 3C. Aunt Jo slid the key in, turned it, and pushed the door open. I stepped inside and everything just stopped. It wasn't huge or flashy. It was perfect. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, spilling across warm hardwood floors. The living room opened straight into a kitchen with white cabinets, granite counters, and actual space to move. Through the windows, I could see the park. Trees, swings, kids bundled up and playing even in the cold. Aunt Jo guided us down the short hallway. "This would be Ethan's," she said softly. His room was twice the size of our entire living area back at the old place. Built-in bookshelves waiting for his stories, a big closet, east-facing windows so he'd wake up to morning light. Ethan ran straight to the window, pressed his face to the glass. "Mommy, swings! I see swings!" The master bedroom took my breath away. Enough room for a real bed, a dresser, maybe even a chair in the corner for reading after long shifts. The bathroom had a deep tub, something I'd only dreamed about on nights when my back ached from 12-hour days. Back in the living room, I noticed it wasn't empty. There was a soft gray sectional, a solid wood coffee table, a dining set that could actually seat 6. The kitchen had real dishes, pots, even little appliances. "Aunt Jo," I said slowly, running my hand over the sofa, "this furniture, it's all new." She gave a sheepish little smile. "I might have gone a bit overboard getting it ready. I wanted you to be able to walk in and just be home." I sank on the couch. It was as comfortable as it looked. Ethan climbed up beside me, already claiming his spot. "Is this our house now, Mommy?" I looked at Aunt Jo. She nodded, eyes shining. My phone buzzed, Dad's name on the screen. Aunt Jo gave me a gentle nod. I answered. "Riley, we need to talk. Maybe Brooke can stay there just until the end of the semester. We'll figure out a transition." "No," I said. My voice was quiet but steady. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no. Not until the end of the semester, not for a weekend, not ever. This is my home. It's been mine for 2 months while I paid rent somewhere else, because you decided Brooke deserved it more." He tried again. "Be reasonable." "No, Dad. This time, I'm being clear." I hung up, turned the phone off. Aunt Jo was beaming. "I haven't heard you sound that sure of yourself in years." And she was right. Something inside me had finally clicked into place. We moved in that very weekend. Turns out, when you don't own much, packing up a life takes almost no time at all. Walking out of that tiny old apartment for the last time felt strange, like closing a chapter I'd been stuck in for too long. The contrast hit me hard. One place felt like barely surviving. This one felt like breathing for the first time. Ethan adapted like kids do. He ran from room to room, claiming shelves for his toys, declaring the breakfast bar the perfect spot for cereal. Aunt Jo helped with everything, packing boxes, setting up utilities in my name, even stocking the fridge with Ethan's favorite ice cream flavors. She'd thought of every detail, registering him for the better school district, finding a pediatrician nearby, little things that made the transition feel seamless. The calls started almost immediately. Dad, Suzanne, Brooke. Voicemails that began apologetic, then shifted to demanding, then angry. I listened to the first few, old habits, but they all said the same thing. Mistakes were made, but Brooke's needs were urgent, and I was being selfish by not compromising. I stopped listening. A week after we moved in, Dad showed up unannounced, knocked on my door like he still had the right. "We need to talk," he said the second I opened it. I didn't let him in at first, but against my better judgment, I stepped aside. Ethan was in his pajamas, watching cartoons on the big TV that had come with the place. Dad glanced around, eyes calculating square footage, costs, everything. "Brooke's struggling," he started. "Dorm life is awful for her. Tiny room, shared bathrooms, cafeteria food. She can't focus." I waited. "She's not used to this, Riley. You've always been the strong one." There it was, the same line I'd heard my whole life. "And whose fault is that, Dad?" My voice stayed quiet, but it didn't shake. "Who decided one daughter deserved comfort and the other deserved to figure it out alone?" He flushed. "We just thought, you thought I'd accept it, like always." I told him to leave. He tried one last time. Maybe Brooke could use the second bedroom on weekends, just to study. "Get out." He stared at me like he didn't recognize me. "This isn't the daughter I raised." "No," I said, holding the door open. "The daughter you raised would have given the keys back by now. I'm done being her." He left, and for the first time, I closed the door without a single doubt. Brooke showed up a few days later, crying in the lobby until a neighbor let her up. She looked exhausted, hair messy, eyes red. "You have to help me," she begged through the cracked door. "The dorm is disgusting. My grades are slipping. This isn't fair." I didn't open the door wider. "Fair?" I repeated. "You lived in my home for 2 months. You sent fake letters pretending to be me. And now you want fairness?" She kept pushing. Weekends, emergencies, just a corner to study. Each time, I said no. Eventually, even she stopped trying. Months passed. Life settled into something I never thought I'd have. Mornings with sunlight pouring into Ethan's room, evenings where I could cook real meals without juggling space, savings that actually grew instead of disappearing the day rent was due. Ethan thrived. I thrived. Brooke ended up getting a part-time job, her first ever. Dad and Suzanne told relatives I was going through a phase. I didn't correct them. Aunt Jo and I grew closer than ever. She split her time between travels and spoiling Ethan rotten. And me? I finally understood the difference between being independent and being abandoned. The apartment was the gift that changed everything on the outside, but the real gift was realizing what I was worth and refusing to accept anything less. If this story touched you, like and subscribe for more about finding your strength when family lets you down. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to stand up to people who were supposed to love you unconditionally? You're not alone.